The air was thick, not with smoke, but with the quiet, potent scent of old canvas and expensive perfume. The low, confident chatter of the Seoul elite at this private gallery opening was a muffled, irrelevant hum, a constant, abrasive whisper of wealth and self-regard. The room itself was a monument to sterile ambition: black tuxedos, white marble, and the deep, challenging colors of the featured West African photography exhibit, a jarring splash of life against the cold modernity. Aysha stood near a large print, a photograph depicting a jubilant crowd at a Ghanaian market. She was a striking presence. Her dress, an emerald green that seemed to absorb and hold all the available light, was a defiant contrast to the monochrome crowd. She didn't just look at the art. She seemed to inhabit it, her gaze finding a familiar gravitational pull in the distant light of the frame. Her heart carried a sharp, disorienting thrum, a nervous energy she always felt when surrounded by such cold, calculated power. It was the ancestral alarm, the warning against assimilation. Across the sprawling, minimalist room, near a sculpture of polished steel, stood Jinwoo. He was a titan of Korean industry, his custom suit a seamless second skin of control. He spoke to a gallery owner, his words automatic, his mind elsewhere, running a perpetual audit on his own worth. For him, the evening was a sequence of mandatory transactions, an endless, joyless commitment to a crushing legacy. Then, he caught her eye. Time froze. It was not a glance. It was an unbroken gaze, a collision of two utterly distinct orbits, 30 seconds of pure magnetic force that silenced the calculated hum of his mind. In that prolonged moment, she saw a dangerous mirror. This man was power, the very force she had spent her life defining herself against. She felt a deep physical tightening, a paradoxical urge to run, yet also a desperate need to step closer to the source of that electric recognition. She wanted to know if the man inside the suit was suffocating too. His hyper-analytical mind went blessedly silent, a shocking sensation. The clinch of his jaw, a permanent fixture of his professional mask, loosened fractionally. In her eyes, he saw not a potential contact or a conquest, but a profound, challenging restlessness, a storm that perfectly matched his own carefully buried turbulence. The air around them tasted suddenly of ozone and possibility, shattering the sterile atmosphere of the gallery. He began to walk toward her, slow, deliberate. The 10 yards between them felt like traversing 10 years of his life, 1,000 unchallenged decisions, a lifetime of granite walls he had been compelled to build. He thought, I spent 3 decades building walls. They were granite, lined with glass, beautiful, impenetrable. In 30 seconds, she didn't just walk through them. She didn't notice they were there. Her existence rendered them irrelevant. Aysha closed her eyes for a fleeting second, taking a deep, almost invisible breath, inhaling the dust and life of the old city trapped in the photograph. When she opened them, he was 2 feet away, filling her vision with an overwhelming, dangerous proximity. That photograph. The light in Accra is unlike anything else. It has weight, he said, his voice low, a rare velvet texture that confessed vulnerability. She met his gaze, refusing to be intimidated. It has history and community, things that can't be bought, Mr. Han, things your world is incapable of valuing. He didn't flinch at her immediate dismissal of his entire existence. Instead, a genuine, slight smile curved his lip, disarming his formidable image. Tell me about them. Tell me what they value. The early days of their bond were a dizzying blur, a sequence of shared intellectual sparring and cultural collisions that played out against the backdrop of Seoul's hidden, authentic spaces, far from his glass tower. This was not dating. It was an excavation of self. In the vast, cathedral-like penthouse library, a space all steel and glass overlooking the glittering tapestry of Seoul, they would sit on the polished floor, surrounded by heavy leather-bound volumes. The smell was new paper and aged whiskey, a scent of inherited learning that felt suffocating to Jinwoo now. Aysha held a worn copy of an ancient Zulu philosophy text, its pages soft with time and use. He gestured to a towering shelf of economic theory, the foundation of his existence. My father built an empire on those concepts: competition, scarcity, the zero-sum game. Aysha traced a line in the Zulu text with a patient, certain finger. The Ghanaian philosopher Kwame Gyekye speaks of something else: Ubuntu. I am because we are, she explained, her voice soft but the conviction absolute. It's not about scarcity, Jinwoo. It's about shared humanity. Your success is inherently tied to mine. True wealth is communal. Jinwoo leaned in, his expression one of pure, desperate attention. He had never been lectured on being before, only on achieving. He inhaled the subtle, clean scent of her lotion and the faint spice of her tea. He felt a profound, almost terrifying curiosity, a sensation more potent than any deal he had ever closed. They spent hours debating the ethical architecture of his company's supply chain, the concept of a circular economy filtered through the rigorous, unforgiving lens of West African wisdom. He was drowning willingly in a sea of philosophy he never knew existed, finding he couldn't take a proper breath anywhere else. On a brutally cold, wet dawn, they stood at the Noryangjin fish market. The air was overwhelmingly pungent, a tidal wave of salt, brine, and the metallic tang of fresh blood. Aysha, bundled in a thick, borrowed jacket, navigated the slick, crowded stalls with practiced ease, her Korean rapid-fire and precise. Jinwoo, in an expensive coat, felt clumsy, utterly out of place. He watched the way she laughed with the fishmongers, the way she touched the still wriggling crabs with respect, the way she instantly belonged. His hands, accustomed only to smooth paper and cool metal, felt alien and useless. You move through this world like a ghost. Unseen by the structure but felt everywhere by the people, he shouted over the constant din of commerce and running water. This is not your world, Jinwoo. This is Seoul's blood, she responded, handing him a plastic bag of live octopus. You only ever look at the stock tickers, never the source. You only see the result, never the cost of the process. They walked away, their fingers brushing accidentally as she adjusted the bag. The sensation was a jolt of warm electricity against the cold morning air, a startling, brief fusion. The encounter left Jinwoo feeling raw, exposed, and deeply ashamed of the sanitized, high-altitude perspective he maintained in his tower. His corporate philosophy, he realized, was built on the deliberate unseeing of places like this. They sought refuge in a quiet wooden paper oasis, a traditional hanok courtyard nestled in an old neighborhood. The sound was the gentle rustle of bamboo leaves and the low, rhythmic click of seeds being transferred between the wooden cups of an ancient Ghanaian board game, Oware. Jinwoo was losing badly. His highly strategic, zero-sum business mind was utterly failing him. You try to conquer the board, Jinwoo. That's the problem, she instructed, her voice soft but absolute. You need to nurture the seeds. To build your resource by helping me build mine. There is always a shared pot. He watched the sunlight catch the fine hairs on her arm as she reached for a seed. He saw his empire as a hollow machine. She was offering me a blueprint for a soul, he thought, the game a painful metaphor for his entire life. He had always sought dominance, never synergy. One night, they sat in a small, crowded cinema watching an old, flickering Ghanaian film. The dialogue was in Twi. Aysha laughed at a subtle cultural joke, the sound unrestrained, a sound of pure, uninhibited joy. That's my grandmother's laugh, she whispered, leaning close enough for him to feel the warmth of her breath. He didn't look at the screen. He looked at her. The pure, uninhibited joy on her face broke something vital within him. He realized with a sickening, dizzying jolt that he was utterly, irrevocably falling into a world he didn't own, a world that was utterly incompatible with the destiny carved out for him. The fear of losing her was only surpassed by the chilling fear that his entire life up until this moment had been a beautifully tailored lie. The first major crack appeared in the sterile, oppressive air of Jinwoo's office tower. It felt like the air conditioning was failing, the air too thick and cold. Aysha was waiting in the antechamber of the Han Group's CEO suite. The room was silent, overwhelmingly scented with sterile, expensive leather and the raw smell of ambition. She felt the heavy weight of the building's prestige pressing down on her. She had made a deliberate choice, wearing a simple, traditional kente cloth scarf over a modern dress, a quiet, absolute assertion of self. Jinwoo's father, a man whose tailored suit seemed to be made of polished steel and whose eyes were carved from granite, walked out of the main office. He did not pause, his powerful progress a statement of absolute importance. You are an interesting hobby for him, the father said in Korean, his voice cold, sharp, and utterly dismissive, his gaze sliding past her as if she were a piece of furniture. But hobbies are fragile. They break. And a CEO cannot afford broken pieces in his life. He has a future, Miss Aysha. You are his past, waiting to happen. You are a detour, he walked on. The words were an icy shock, a devastating confirmation of Aysha's deepest fear, that her love for Jinwoo would inevitably demand the dilution or even erasure of the hard-won identity she had cultivated. She didn't fear Jinwoo. She feared the crushing vacuum of his world, a world where she would be perpetually incomplete. She stayed perfectly still, maintaining her composure, but her hands, clutching her worn leather messenger bag, trembled almost imperceptibly. She smelled the fear on herself, a faint metallic scent like pennies. The accusation lingered. She was disposable, a distraction from destiny. Hours later, alone in her small, crowded apartment, Aysha paced a familiar track. It smelled comfortingly of roasting peanuts and shea butter, a scent that tasted like safety. Jinwoo's calls had gone unanswered. She couldn't face the weight of his compromise, his attempt to drag his past into his future. She stared at a photo of her late mother and father, standing proudly outside their home in Accra. She felt the weight of their expectation, the silent ancestral vow she made to herself long ago. Never lose yourself for a man, no matter the man. She saw the path laid out by Jinwoo's world, the endless corporate meetings, the forced smiles, the expected heirs, the crushing pressure of the Han name. She loved him, the man she knew, the man she was uncovering, but she could not and would not marry the empire. Her decision solidified, cold and clear as mountain ice. She pulled out her laptop, bought a one-way ticket, Seoul to Accra. Then she wrote a note, her pen scratching furiously against the thick, cream-colored paper. She poured every fear, every desperate need for self-preservation into those few devastating lines. She thought, I saw the man he was finally becoming, free, generous, real. But I also saw the vacuum his family was creating, the gravity of his destiny. And I knew if I stayed, one of us would eventually have to disappear to make room for the other. It couldn't be me. She left the note prominently on his side of the low Korean tea table they bought together. The 4 simple lines were an act of self-preservation that felt like total abandonment. Jinwoo entered his apartment after a brutal late-night board meeting. He was utterly exhausted, but there was a strange, unfamiliar lightness in his chest. He had finally stood up to his father, refusing a strategic merger. He couldn't wait to tell Aysha about his small, defiant victory, to share the burden he had finally begun to shed. He saw the ticket, stark white against the dark wood of the tea table. His stomach plummeted before his mind could process the image. He walked over, his movements slow, heavy, anticipatory. The air was too quiet. He smelled only the faint, fading trace of her perfume, the delicate ghost of jasmine. He read the note. No. He breathed out, the sound a low animal rasp ripped from his chest. The note was there. The ink slightly smeared from a stray drop of water, or perhaps a silent final tear. I need to go home. I need to be whole. Do not follow, Aysha. The words struck him with a terrifying physical force, a solar plexus punch that instantly knocked the air from his lungs. The controlled man shattered. Not with anger, but with a deep, resonant, agonizing panic. The silence in the apartment became a screaming void. All his transformation, all his sacrifice, was it all too little, too late? The primal fear he had spent his life suppressing erupted. He no longer heard his father's cold words. He only heard Aysha's "do not follow." It became an immediate, absolute challenge. A final, desperate dare to prove the authenticity of his transformation. He ran to his private study. He was already on the phone, his voice tight, lethal with a desperation he had never allowed himself to feel, a vulnerability channeled into absolute action. Book the jet immediately. Route Seoul to Accra and alert the local team. I need transport on the ground the minute I land. I don't care about the board meeting. I don't care about the stock price. The Han Group is irrelevant now. I am going to Ghana. 5,000 miles later, in the relentless, cramped cabin of his private jet, Jinwoo hadn't slept for nearly 36 hours. His suit was wrinkled, his mask gone. His carefully cultivated composure had been replaced by a raw, relentless, almost animal focus. He had been studying detailed satellite maps of Accra, trying to pinpoint her likely refuge. The entire economic infrastructure of the Han Group, which had absorbed his every waking thought for 15 years, was now a tedious, distant abstraction. He clutched a small, heavy stone Aysha once gave him, a piece of dark basalt from Jeju Island. He felt the terrifying fever-pitch heat of his own desperation. He knew, with an absolute desperate certainty, that do not follow was her final act of preservation, not abandonment. She was testing the depth of his change, the sincerity of his break from his past. He thought, I chased her 5,000 miles not to drag her back to my world, but to prove I would follow her to hers. To prove my life was no longer bound by walls. It was bound by her horizon and nowhere else. If I couldn't sacrifice my empire, I didn't deserve her humanity. The jet landed with a soft bump, bringing him to a point of no return. The heat of Accra hit him like a physical blow, heavy, humid and rich with the smell of roasting maize, sea salt and diesel. The sounds were a joyous, chaotic explosion, music, laughter, and the constant rhythmic sound of vendors calling out. It was vibrant, terrifying, and utterly real. Jinwoo was utterly foreign, an alien in his tailored clothing. His expensive shoes were useless on the dusty, uneven ground. He found the address, a small, brightly painted, welcoming home with a courtyard filled with drying laundry and the vibrant scent of hibiscus, a contrast to the gray efficiency of Seoul. He saw her. Aysha was sitting with a group of older women, teaching them English from a worn textbook, her expression serene, centered. She wore a simple cotton skirt and her hair was braided. She was home. She was whole. She looked up. Their eyes locked across the small courtyard, the 5,000 miles they had traveled collapsing into a single, fraught moment of reckoning. The noise of Accra faded to a dull, insignificant roar. You followed, she whispered, the statement holding a terrifying mix of disbelief and sad resignation. He was out of breath, his hands shaking, his control entirely gone. The note was a lie. You know it was a lie, Aysha, a self-destructive lie. Her voice cracked, pain radiating from her certainty. No, it was a choice. I chose myself. I chose the air I can breathe. I chose not to be erased by your legacy. Tears burned his eyes, a raw, stinging sensation he hadn't felt since childhood. And I chose you. Don't you see? That's what you taught me. I am because we are. You told me my success was tied to yours. I can't be whole without you, Aysha. I came to prove I understood Ubuntu, to prove my being is tied to yours. He stepped into the center of the courtyard, right in front of her. The women were silent, watching the powerful, intimate drama unfold. He drew a ragged breath, the final agonizing sacrifice ready. On the plane, I called my father. I sold the controlling interest in the Han Group. I told him to install my cousin as CEO. It's done. I walked away. I have nothing left to give up. Aysha was stunned, unable to process the total demolition of his identity, the end of the corporate dynasty he was born to inherit. You gave up the empire, she whispered, pure, shattering disbelief in her voice. His sacrifice was evident in the exhausted slump of his shoulders. It was never mine. It was his. I'm free. I'm just a man. I have capital. I have skill. But I have no legacy to uphold but the one we build together. I have nothing left to give up. I am here to ask you what we build next. I am here to work. He reached out and gently touched the kente cloth on her shoulder, the fabric rough, familiar, authentic. He smelled the scent of her true home. I don't want a trophy wife. I want a partner. I want my Aysha, in Accra, in Seoul, wherever you are whole. I will live on your terms. Aysha's fear finally collapsed, annihilated by the magnitude of his surrender, replaced by an overwhelming, liberating flood of relief and love. She didn't hesitate. She stepped into his arms. The embrace was a powerful, crushing reunion of two separated worlds. The heat of Accra, the dust on his skin, the loud, chaotic joy of the neighborhood, it all washed over them, a baptism into their shared future. You are so much better than your legacy, she said against his neck, a tear finally escaping. Only with you, he replied, holding her close, his eyes shut tight. The only man he had ever truly wanted to be. 5 years later. The building was modern, bright, and incorporated traditional Ghanaian design, the perfect fusion of efficiency and warmth. It smelled of fresh coffee, teak, and potential, the tangible scent of a new shared purpose. A small brass plaque outside read, "The Ubuntu Han Foundation." He thought, it was a long conversation about boundaries, about respect, about what kind of life we wanted. My capital, her vision, a synthesis, not a compromise. A partnership built on the core principle of I am because we are.